Cool. I think it's game time. I want to extend a very, very warm welcome to all the Markides fans in the room and joining us online as well. It's really a wonderful occasion. It's wonderful to have everyone here in person as well, and it's great to be able to celebrate Christos' successes. I'm the head of department here. My name is Omar Mata. I've got the pleasure of first telling you that if you hear a continuous ringing, then it is unfortunately the real thing, because we're not expecting a drill, and you have to leave from that door where Professor Jackson's just entered out, and then the meeting point would be at the corner of Exhibition Road and Imperial College Road. That's the first thing I need to say to you. The second thing I need to say to you is that the event will be recorded, so after the lecture, if you are going to ask a question, make sure that it's a question that Christos can actually answer. So, yeah, you know, that has to be part of the deal, all right? Or you don't get any dinner at all, or we just stop talking to you. Okay, and then the final 3 minutes, I want to say that the first time I met Christos was actually on the phone. A mutual friend put us in touch because Christos was, I think he was director of studies at Robinson at some point in Cambridge, and he wanted to know whether there were any opportunities for lectureships here. So I tried my best to of course, to dissuade him from coming. I did a terrible job. And he showed up to the interview. And when he showed up to the interview, he was carrying this contraption that looked like a water pipe that you could actually smoke. It looked really dodgy. And some of you in the audience will know what it is. It kept calling it NIFTY. And I think NIFTY stood for non-inertive fluid thermal engines or something or other like that. And he kept holding this thing and talking about it, like, really, this thing, this guy? Anyway, we gave him a job, well, made him a job offer, and then eventually he came here in 2008 as a lecturer, and I think an RC UK Foster Wheeler fellow as well, okay? And so that was 2008, seems an eternity ago. In 2014, I think he became a senior lecturer, and then he jumped to a reader in a couple of years, and he jumped to professor in 2018. He was a full professor, and by then he had created the Clean Energy Processes Lab, which is now really, really rock and roll. And so along the way, he's done some wonderful things in the department. He's done some really great teaching. He taught first year fluid mechanics, which is a tough course to teach, and it was incredibly well received. Every year he would win the Lecturer of the Year award. And just to give you some perspective, this is one of the very first lecture courses that the first years see in their very first term, in their very first year with us here. And the fact that it was always voted as the best lecture course in the first year says a lot about Christos's skills, and he's smiling, but he really is pretty good. And then in terms of research, well, I mean, all you need to do is to look at Google Scholar, to look at the volume and the quality of the work that CEP produce in the areas of energy, fluid mechanics, heat transfer, multiphase flows, experiments, some modeling, really, really well received. And I've had the pleasure of working with Christos over the years, and I can tell you he really is top-notch, and his group are top-notch as well. He's chosen solar. And obviously solar is really important for the transition, but I have a sneaky suspicion that he's chosen solar so that he can go and work in Cyprus and in Mauritius and in South Africa and all the nice hotspots around the world so he can do his research. And what a clever guy he is. I mean, we'd all love to have that kind of opportunity. I think, that's wonderful. And speaking of solar, that's obviously part of the inaugural. And speaking of the inaugural, I think it's high time that I invite Christos to deliver his inaugural lecture. I think, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you. I remember that interview to this day. And there are lots of funny stories about that. Okay, so let's start. I'll start by saying something that Omar already noted, which is that we do a lot of work in the group, and I couldn't present everything. And I say this mostly for the people that went through the group and did a lot of work with me over the years. I had to pick one topic because it's quite short. It's only 40 minutes, so I picked solar because I think it brings together a lot of the things that we've been trying to do. Now, what do we do in the group very quickly? This is a sort of a research rationale, is that we focus on technology. So ideally, next generation technology. But in order for us to design, build, test, right, and propose next generation technology, We need to go one level down into the sciences, so we need to really understand fundamentals and improve processes. And we need to go one level up, which is to try to understand how these technologies are operated within wider systems. Okay? So we try to go to cover, span this range of activities that go from fundamentals to components, optimization of technologies, to how they work within real systems. And that's what we've been trying to do for the last, 12 years that I've been here and before that. And the last step is very, very important because it's only at that level where your technology starts to interact with the system around it that you can really understand and grasp what its potential is, whether it makes sense or not, because it has to be better than the alternative, and most of the times there is an alternative. So there are a lot of things going on in the group. We've split ourselves into divisions over the years, and unfortunately I can't present all of the work that's going on. I'm just doing that one bullet point, and I just wanted to say thank you also to all the people that contributed over the years that don't necessarily fall into this category, but their work has certainly helped the group in all of the things that we've been doing. So I'm going to start nice and easy. This is just motivation. And I'll say that you'll be familiar with this, right? So you'll be familiar with photovoltaics. These are just the panels that you find on roofs of buildings. But this picture is really about power generation. Very, very large plants, typically in the desert, typically somewhere where there's sun and there's no people around. So photovoltaics, okay, we're very familiar with this. There's another technology which is very important in the context of large-scale power generation from the sun. It's called CSP, concentrating solar power. This CSP is very different in the way that it converts sunlight into electrical power. But nonetheless, the overall concept or result is the same. Harness the sun, yes, and generate electrical power. Now, these plots are quite interesting, and I'll say two very, very quick things. By the way, these are real costs. These dots are real costs. These are something called this is the levelized cost of electricity, okay, which is the total cost to produce a unit of electrical energy over the lifetime of a project, right? So it's the capital cost, the maintenance, the operating cost, everything over the lifetime of the system. And at the bottom here, there's a green bar, a range here, an area, and that area is where you would find conventional fossil fuel generation. So I'm going to make two statements, which I think are not difficult to make at this stage in the year 2020, one of which is generating electricity from sunlight through these technologies. Either one of them is now competitive, okay, with conventional power generation. You might have been able to make the argument that solar is expensive 10 years ago. This is no longer true, okay? The second thing is you might be able to say, yeah, but these things don't work at night, and once you add the cost of the batteries, the costs go up and so on. Well, yeah, but CSP over here, which is this one, yeah, which has dropped just like PV very significantly. These projects can have anything from 4 hours to 16, 17 hours of storage. They can run flat out almost, okay? Night and day. So this argument that solar doesn't work at night or that solar is very important might have had, yeah, some sway 10 years ago, but not anymore, okay? Now this is large-scale power generation. And I wanted to make the point that I'm not going to be telling you about large-scale power generation today. We're going to be talking about smaller systems, yeah? So systems that you can install, so-called in distributed applications, in your home, buildings, neighborhoods, yes? Communities, small communities, up to, from a few kilowatts. So a house would be, say, a few kilowatts of electrical power, all the way up to a few hundreds of kilowatts, okay? And typically, these smaller systems in distributed applications, they are closer to cities where people live, and you have constraints. You can't just go out in the desert and put mirrors and start concentrating, getting very high temperatures. So what this means, due to these constraints in space, is that you can't have too many mirrors, you can't get too high temperatures from the sun, so you end up with so-called non or low concentrating systems at low temperatures. It's not always the case, but it's typically the case that you're constrained in distributed applications, okay? Because there are buildings around you and people. So here's what we're going to be focusing on, right? Smaller scale systems and lower temperatures. What's available to us? Okay, on the left-hand side, things that you probably already know. So we have photovoltaics. You can install them on your roof. They can give you electrical power. They're very dedicated for this particular job, generating electricity from photons from the sun, and they're very good at it. And on the left, you have something called solar hot water heaters, right? So these are systems. There are different types of systems where there's a liquid that flows, typically might be water, might be something else. But in any case, you heat up this liquid, you store it in a tank, if it's water, and you use it later to have a shower or whatever else you want. Okay? Again, a very different job by a very different technology. But hot water, heating, electricity, these are energy forms that we both need. Okay? And so the question that arises at this point is, can we get both? Well, of course you can get both. You can just put the two systems side by side on your roof, right? But the question is, can we go one step further? Can we get both from the same panel, from the same collector area, and can we get them in a way where there's a sort of a synergistic benefit, okay? Where there's a benefit to the electricity and the hot water that we get relative to side-by-side systems? And the answer is yes. And there's something called hybrid PVT collectors, where the sun goes in, you have an electrical output, and you have a thermal output. And that thermal output can be delivered as useful heat to an end user. Great. So this is existing stuff. We didn't do anything new here. But why, and what is the synergistic benefit here? So this is a plot of the efficiency of photovoltaic materials, different materials. You can pick any one of those lines you want. And what you find is that as the temperature of the cell gets higher and higher, the efficiency of that cell gets lower and lower. In most cases, linearly, okay? So I'll say two things. Number one, when is your solar system generating the most electrical energy? When it's sunny and warm, correct? So exactly at the conditions where you think that you're generating and you have the potential to generate a lot of electricity from your solar PV system, guess what? Your solar PV system is getting hot and you're losing a lot of power, okay? In hot countries, this could easily go up to 70, 75 degrees. And that's a 20% drop in efficiency because the system is getting very hot, okay? Now, a 20% efficiency drop, okay, is something like 5% of all of the power, not the solar energy generation, all of the power generation of Europe, lost globally, simply because, just to give you a feeling for this, it's a large amount of power which is lost due to this efficiency drop. Now, this is a problem, but it's also an opportunity, because if you really think about it, it's telling you another thing, which is that if you're able to go back the other way, from right to left, somehow by cooling the cells, then you can get a higher efficiency than you would have had otherwise, while at the same time having some heat to deliver. And this is where solar PVT comes in. Okay, so there are many products on the market. This is already commercially available technology, and these are conventional designs. Typically, what you do in a conventional PVT design is you have your cells. Your cells are stuck really well onto something which has a high thermal conductivity, like a copper plate. Behind that, you have a flow of some fluid. It could be water, it could be air, it could be anything you want. Most of the time, it's water or air. And the idea here is that you have a very, very good thermal contact between the cells and the fluid. And that's what allows you to pull a lot of heat out of your cells. Now, there's another consequence of this, which is that the temperature of the fluid and the temperature of the cells are actually very close together because of this good thermal contact. Okay? We'll come back to this in a minute. But you have different designs. These are so-called unglazed designs. And these are glazed designs. And glazing is just a fancy word for a window, right? A glass layer on top of the cell, on top of the collector. And there's a reason for this. It's because it gives you better thermal performance. All right? Now, this is a very interesting plot that a student of mine did at the very, very early days of us looking at PVT technology. What she did is she went and she found manufacturers of PVT panels, and she plotted the electrical and thermal performance stated by the manufacturer for different products by different manufacturers. And there's something that you can observe very, very quickly when you look at this, which is that somehow the electrical and thermal performance of different designs, these manufacturers are not in collusion, believe me, are correlated. If you try to design a conventional PVT collector to give you more heat, then somehow the electrical efficiency drops and vice versa. Okay? There's a trade-off between those two. And that's not good for us, because ideally you never want to trade electricity for heat, because electricity is much more valuable than heat. We can talk about how and why, but I think most people would understand that electricity is more valuable than heat. So you don't really want to play this game where you're losing electricity to deliver heat. Okay? All right. But we're talking about efficiencies. We're talking about heat and electricity. But when it comes to heat, it's not just the amount of thermal energy which is important, but it's also the temperature at which that thermal energy is available. The higher the temperature that you have that heat, the more things you can do with it, okay? And here you can see a plot of different secondary downstream processes that you can run if you have heat available at different temperatures, okay? Now, a second limitation to conventional PVT designs, other than this link between electricity and heat, where you trade one thing off for the other, is that you're limited in terms of temperature. So we said a couple of slides ago that the temperature of the fluid and the temperature of the cell are very close together, and they're connected very tightly. So if you try to run your water stream very, very hot, so you can do a lot of things with it, your cells are running hot. And vice versa. If you try to cool the cells, then you're going to have a very low temperature thermal output, which is very bad for you, okay? So that's a problem and a challenge for us. So there are two things that we want to do. Number one, we want to break the link between the efficiency trade-off that we were talking about before, and also we want to break the temperature. We want to have a very high thermal output in terms of its temperature, and we want to keep the cells cold. So how can we do that? Well, we can do it by basing our designs on a very, very different principle to what conventional collectors are doing. Instead of connecting the cells to some kind of thermal absorber very tightly, right, we realize that sun is something which is broadband, right? It's distributed over different colors. There's UV, there are different colors, visible, infrared, different wavelengths. And photovoltaic materials are not sensitive to all wavelengths. They're only sensitive to some of them. So could we magically take the sun, split it into two parts, one of which are wavelengths that the cells are sensitive to, and we send that to the cells, and the other one of which is wavelengths that the cells are not sensitive to and not send it to the cells, because all they're going to do is just heat up the cells unnecessarily. They cannot become electricity, right? Can we do this? Can we split these two things? And the answer is, well, yes, we can. There are many ways to do it. We can preferentially reflect some wavelengths using magical mirrors. We can preferentially absorb different wavelengths by using magical filters. And we can use semi-transparent solutions, and I'll show you some of this stuff a little bit later on. But there are ways, in which we can do this. And there are designs in literature that have been proposed. So here I'm just giving you a couple of designs that rely on preferential reflection of some parts of the light to something that gets hot while the rest of it goes through to the cells. Okay, so that's the background. Now, what have we done? Because all of that is work that other people have done, right? So this is us riding on the shoulders of giants. That's where we were, and this is where we come in. So I want to take you through a journey where we start from the fundamentals, the science. What materials should we use? Yes, over here. Let's go to engineering. How do we design components, collectors? How do we optimize those collectors? And then how do we use those collectors within wider systems to really understand what potential they have in real applications? Okay, let's start from science, okay? What materials should we use for spectral splitting? What materials and coatings can we use to suppress heat losses? And I'll just say one word and I'll go very quickly to the next slide, which is in a PV panel, losing heat is not a problem. Because if you lose heat in a PV panel, you're cooling your panel, you get more electricity, that's great. But in a PVT collector, heat is something you want to deliver. So you don't really want to lose it in the first place. You want to trap it. There are two ways in which heat is lost, by convection, by radiation. Cutting down convection losses is easy, right? You can pull a vacuum, you can put this glazing layer, and you can pull a vacuum, and vacuums are very good at suppressing convective heat losses. So that's good for us. But how do you suppress radiative losses? Well, those of you that know about radiation will also know that there's something called emissivity, which is a property of some surface that tells us how much it can emit radiation outwards, okay? So we could just have low emissivity, right? Which means that it's not radiating outwards, so we're trapping all the heat and we're not losing it by radiation. And that's easy to say, but there's a problem, and the problem is that emissivity and absorptivity are the same thing. So if you have a surface with a very low emissivity, it also has a very low absorption, which means that you're not trapping the sun in the first place. You're absorbing the sun's energy. So how do we overcome this problem? Well, we overcome it by having so-called emissivity control, or selective emissivity, which means that at the wavelengths where the sunlight is coming in, we want to absorb, so we want a very high absorption. And luckily for us, at the wavelengths where your surface is re-emitting as a black body, which are separated, we want to have a low emission, so we don't want to re-emit that back out. So we want to trap the sun and not send stuff out. And there are ways to do this, and this is some work that we did with a very good colleague of mine who was at Imperial. Unfortunately, now he left, he went to Australia, Ned Eakins Docks, where we tried ITO coatings to see whether we could affect the emissivity of silicon solar cells when we applied them as coatings. And the answer is yes, you can. And the real question is, okay, by how much? How are you affecting the efficiency? We'll come back to that later. Now, what do we do about these optical filters, right? These spectral splitting filters. I know this is a complicated picture, but if you really think about it, what we've just said before is that some part of the spectrum, right, needs to be split off and sent to the cells. So the question is, which part of the spectrum, right? Which are the two extreme boundaries of wavelengths that we need? And the answer is, well, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the photovoltaic material, it depends on the concentration, it depends on a lot of things. But it also depends, and this was a very nice bit of work that Gan did over here, who's going to help in a minute. So there's another thing that it depends on, which is that is the relative value between heat and electricity. If you think about it, right, how much of the spectrum gets sent for electricity and how much gets sent for heat depends on the value between electricity and heat, okay? And there are many ways to define this value. You could define it thermodynamically, right, based on some kind of second law arguments, or it could be a cost, it could be an economic value, right? Heat and electricity cost different things. You could define it different ways, but whichever way you define it, once you've defined it, you have maps that GAN generated that tell us for different PV materials, right, which are the limits of the part of the spectrum you want to split off, and if you do that in an ideal way, what the efficiency is of that particular solution. Great. So this is ideal stuff. But how do we do it in reality? Well, there's a lot of people working on nanofluids, which is liquids with suspensions of particles in them. They're very good at absorbing, right, different parts of the spectrum. All of this absorption characteristic depends a little bit on the material, the size of the particle, the shape of the particle, the concentration. So there's a lot of work going on. We've done a little bit, but not a lot in this space, because there are problems with suspensions, which typically, as in the problems, typically are that the particles can agglomerate and they can basically come out of solution, and that's a problem. So we kind of took a different route. We said, well, why don't you try to absorb into a liquid phase itself? Right? So liquids can absorb. Water is a very good example of this. Water absorbs infrared very well. Okay? And if you look at groups of different chemicals, okay, so there are different types of bonds and different chemical substances, and those, of course, have very different characteristics. So we're applying a methodology called molecular design, and we're very, very early stages of this, but conceptually, I think you get the picture here. What we're trying to do is we're trying to identify the absorption characteristics of different types of groups. And if we know those absorption characteristics and we know that we need a type of filter, then which combinations of those groups would give us the optical filter that we need, okay? Now, this is the type of approach that in chemical engineering is quite common. It's applied to solvent design, working fluids for different types of cycles and things like this. It's just, so it's a known approach, it's just, it's the first time that it's been applied to this type of problem, okay? There's another very interesting possibility, which is that you can also shift the wavelengths of light. So if you had a way of taking some of the UV that your cell is not sensitive to and moving it into the visible that your cell is sensitive to, right, then that's very useful for you. You can get a higher electrical efficiency. And there are ways you can do this. We've been investigating hydrogels, doped so they're naturally porous, right, as a material itself. So you can add nanoparticles to these hydrogels. There are different types of particles that you can use. We've been using some organics, okay, and we've proven that this can be done. It's still at a conceptual level. And then there are approaches based on semi-transparent cells where we have slightly different arrangement. The light goes first through the cell, right? And then whatever doesn't get converted to electricity, it flows straight through, right? And of course here there are a lot of questions about, okay, what would be the material you pick for your cell, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip some of this. Because I want to go from, okay, discussing a little bit the materials and the cell types and the fluids that you use and your filter to, okay, how do we now design a collector, right? Because we need the technology itself. So there are two ways, and we've done work on both of these. One is through modeling, right? So we need sophisticated models, typically three-dimensional dynamic models that can describe the operation and performance of different types of collectors. These are the models where knowing, let's say, the optical properties, the emissivity, the absorptivity, right, of different coatings, the conductivity and the thickness of different layers and how you arrange them in geometry would allow you to predict, right, from those properties, we need to go to what is the electrical efficiency and what is the thermal efficiency of this collector, okay? And so there are different designs. We can apply them, we can validate them. So you see this is a typical result where you do some experiment, you validate your model, you trust it a little bit more, and now you start making changes to the design. And what you see here is a collector on the left-hand side. It's a bit bright, but you can see here that there are, it's in a tube. First of all, there are cells inside a tube, right? So that tube is there to pull a vacuum, so you suppress convective losses. The other thing you can see is that there are two tubes, and one of them looks slightly different color, right? So it's a bit greenish yellow. That's because the cells have been coated, right, by ITO, which is basically to control the emissivity and to suppress the radiation losses, okay? So the second thing you want to do is go away from all the modeling, and now you have to start doing some actual testing, okay? And these are real tests where we can demonstrate that due to this emissivity control, you have a significant thermal benefit relative to if you didn't have coating applied. But these are still conventional designs, right? There's no spectral splitting involved here. So if you look very closely, there's a small electricity penalty that you pay, right, to get that benefit in thermal performance, okay? So this is a spin-out coming from the department that I've been involved with, and here we've been doing experiments on spectral splitting collectors. And by the way, this is a real thing, and it's over here, and if you want to come later, you can see what it looks like. But the point here is that now we're going to tests of real spectral splitting type collectors, okay? And this is a lot of work that we did up here on the roof. Believe it or not, there is sun. Not as much as in Cyprus, but there is sun, so we've done some tests here. And what you want to see from these types of tests, and I'm just going to bring your attention to the first bar here on the left-hand side and the last one, is that you want to show relative to a PV panel, which you can see sitting next to the PVT collector, right? So there are two, you can see two panels, right? One is the PVT collector, one is just PV. Standard standalone PV panel. What you want to show is that you can generate as much electricity as the standalone PV panel. You don't want to sacrifice electricity, right? But you have added extra heat from the same area, okay? And this is the result that you'd want to show. Some nice little other things that we're looking at, and I think now I want to do a little bit of a demonstration. So Gan and John, if you can help me out. So here we have, come on. So here we have a semi-transparent PV window. Okay, I spoke to you a little bit about this semi-transparent stuff a few slides ago. And what does this do? Well, it's basically exactly what Gan is showing you over there. It's a window, right? So you can see through it, but it can generate electricity, okay? Because there's a photovoltaic material somehow in that window. Now what we've done is we've taken that window and we've built it into a hybrid PVT collector, okay? Which means that there's a fluid behind it, and that fluid can be used to extract thermal energy, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you why this thing works. Okay. All right. Okay. So here you can see Jan's hand, right, visually, so that's great. If he puts it behind, you can still see it, right? So that means visible light is going through, right? It's going through the liquid layer, which is a filter, and it's going through the cell, which is semi-transparent. Great. And what GAN is going to do now is going to show you what you see through an infrared camera, which means what happens to the radiative heat. Okay? So let's do that again. Okay, so Jan's fingers are hot, so we can see them glowing. And if you go behind, magic, right? They're not there anymore. Okay? Why are they not anymore? Because the infrared energy from the hand is being absorbed into the liquid layer, right, which is in the window and doesn't make its way to the camera. Okay? So what are we doing here? We're basically, right, able to give you a window which can generate electricity. You can see through. Okay? You can control the optical properties of this window. So you can cut down, for example, UV that goes into a room and infrared. And you can also generate some heat because some of the heat is trapped in the liquid layer. Okay? And here's this window, and I won't say much other than, once again, what you want to demonstrate experimentally, right, is that you have the same amount of electricity that you would have had, plus now you get some heat and all the benefits, right, of optical control, lighting control, and so on. We've done some simulations on more advanced designs. Yeah, so this is a concentrating fluid-based spectral splitting collector that I don't have a lot of time to tell you about. And there are all sorts of results that basically show us that these types of collectors, right, have great promise to deliver heat at very high temperatures compared to what you can get by conventional PVT, right? So conventional PVT, you wouldn't run more than 60 degrees, 70 degrees. Here we have temperatures that you can see here, right? They're going all the way up to 300-400 degrees. You would never get that from a conventional design. The reason is because you can't run your cells at 400 degrees, okay? So there's a lot of promise, but this is still at the simulation level. And now there's a nice project. I'm going to skip this. So there's a semi-transparent, again, modeling of all of that stuff. But I'll go very quickly to that, which is the next step, which is basically an experimental validation of all of these simulations, right, of high-temperature concentrating PVT systems. There's a project funded by the Royal Society in collaboration with Mexico. One of the researchers involved in this is actually here, came from Mexico to spend some time with us. And the idea now is we want to try to test some of these ideas on a real concentrating parabolic trough collector, right, which they have done in Mexico. So experimental work is going down in Mexico. Hopefully I'll have some good news for you soon. Okay. And this is the last bit I want to say before we move on to some system level work, which is that there is a challenge with heat. And the challenge with heat, I've been in this area for a long time, is that it doesn't have a very high value. The second challenge with heat is that it tends to be available where there's a lot of sun. So having a PVT collector in Saudi Arabia, it's going to be great. You're going to generate a lot of heat from a PVT collector, but the Saudis are going to say, we don't really care too much about that, which they've told me. Most hot countries have a lot of sun, but don't need heat, right? Good. So can we, right, have some kind of embedded, integrated converter that takes that heat and turns it into things that we actually do care about, right? For example, we might care about clean water. We might care about cooling. And there are processes that can do this conversion. The real question is, can we do them internally, not downstream, not as a separate process? Yes, that's, in inverted commas, easy. You can do that with existing technology. But can you do it within the collector itself in a way which is synergistic again? Right? So the fact that this process is happening inside the collector is giving you a higher electrical conversion than it would have otherwise. And we've started working on this, and there's some very nice work that GAN is doing. And by the way, there's something that's been running here on the right-hand side. I don't know if you've noticed it, which is a little demonstration, which is what we call PVD. Okay, we came up with this PVD. All right, so D stands for desalination, which is, can we generate electricity and desalinate water, right, inside the same collector at the same time in a way, right, that the desalination process results in a higher electrical performance than if you just had PV. Okay. And he'll show you a little bit more about this later, but there's a whole area here of using transpiration cooling, so inspired by nature, right? Capillary-driven flow, so you don't use a pump, okay? Through these types of sponge layers or bamboo or other types of materials I'll show you in the next slide, yeah, so that you can drive a flow through these collectors passively without a pump. And this is what happens. So this is the design that you can see here under the solar simulator that's been running here from the beginning of the lecture. I forgot to tell you, but this started empty, that little glass over there, and hopefully there'll be some water in it at the end, okay? But basically what we do here is we have some kind of fiber, right? So there's a liquid that gets transported on the fire due to porosity and capillary action. The water gets evaporated inside these small pores. It turns into a vapor, and then it gets collected somewhere else, okay? And then therefore, yes, we have the ability to deliver clean water, but what we've done is we've taken energy away, right, from the cells. And therefore we've cooled it down. So I'll show you a very quick result here. What you can see here is running under a solar simulator. You can see that instead of reaching, so a PV cell, without doing what we're doing, we'd reach 70 or 80 degrees under a solar simulator, right? Doing what we're doing means that you're dropping down to a little bit less than 50 degrees, so that's a significant drop in temperature. At the same time, you're generating the water that we just mentioned. Okay. This is a video, speeded up, but it's the same thing that you can see here down on the left-hand side of, or your left-hand side of the lecture theater, which is you can see the water sort of dripping out, and this can be collected, okay? And what you want to see on the top right-hand side is, again, a picture that proves that you don't need to sacrifice your electrical efficiency. If you look very carefully, that blue band is your electrical efficiency. You don't need to sacrifice it. Not only that, you can get a little bit more electricity than you would get from a PV cell. Plus, now you can deliver heat. Plus, you can deliver clean water. Okay? Trees of the future, or something like that. Yeah, this is a nice picture. Gan, thank you. I like this one. All right. And this, again, at the conceptual level, is a little bit early stage for us. There are processes to produce hydrogen. Is there a way for us not to use the heat and the electricity downstream, but is there a way for us to run these processes to generate hydrogen within, again, the collector, right, in a way that takes away some of the heat and allows the cell to run at higher temperatures? Collaboration with UNSW, colleague of ours there. Okay, at the systems level, we're going to go a little bit faster now. So we have very complicated systems with multiple processes, okay? We have collectors that generate heat, electricity. That could be stored. It could go to a user. It could go to the grid. There could be downstream processes that we said that we were trying to avoid, but they still could be there. There's no reason why you can't use the heat to run an absorption chiller. There's no reason why you can't use electricity to drive a heat pump, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of complexity. And so in order for us to understand the potential of these systems, we need to try to run different configurations for different applications to see what the benefits are. And we need to look at the economics, and we need to look at the environmental benefits of these systems, and we need to look at them relative to the alternative. This is a PV heating system. So this is like, let's say, the easiest type of application where you just have your PV panels, you get electricity, you send it to the home, and you get some hot water, and you use that for domestic purposes. You can do this in many different countries. You can imagine that the performance of the system depends on where you are, not only because the sunlight characteristics are different, right, but also because the energy demands of the home are very different, okay? So the results change depending on where you are. You're always space limited, right? So there's always the question, well, I only have a certain area available to me. You can't just say, well, I can do whatever I want. And the question is, okay, given some space limitations, what fraction of a home's demands can you cover? What are the economics of all of this and the benefits and so on? You can go to slightly larger systems, and you can now look at processes where you don't need the heat, you don't need the hot water, but you need cooling, right? So we've done a lot of this work as well. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it's basically the same picture, right? Different geographies, different applications. This is actually an industrial process. It's a dairy farm, and they need a different energy output. They need cooling. They don't need hot water. And here we need an even more complex system. We have an end user that requires heat, cooling, and power, and we're getting all of those from the same type of collector. And we need to try to control the system and deliver different things at different times. And the questions are always the same, right? Given some area, how much of the demand of this plant can we cover? what does it cost, and what are the environmental benefits? Okay. Do these systems make sense? Okay. The answer, the simple and easy answer, or the cop-out answer, is it depends. Okay, because it always does. But I think we can draw some conclusions. I think over the years we've done enough of these case studies in different countries, in different climates, for different types of systems, small ones, big ones for industrial applications, heating, cooling, okay, whatever. There is some kind of message that's coming across here. And the message is this. Relative to, let's say, just PV, because most people are familiar with this, okay, these systems are more expensive. That's obvious. They take longer to pay back your initial investment, but they always result in a larger reduction, right, or a larger mitigation in emissions or equivalent emissions from the home, okay? And they always deliver additional energy to the home. So they always make some home building more independent, okay, from energy sources that it relies upon. Okay, so this is a conclusion, and I think you can see here just some examples that I put down some numbers just to give you a rough feeling for by how much. Okay, so it is more expensive, right, but it has a greater potential for emission reduction. Okay, my lecture is over, but as I was writing these slides, I just want to say a couple of things, if I may. As I was writing these slides, I was asking myself, how did I get here? How did I get here? And I mean academically. Let's keep it focused. So the first step, I think, I remember, my dad passed away many years ago. He goes there, the first bullet point. But I remember one day he kind of said this phrase to me, and he said, you know, become an engineer, you're too smart to become a medic. And he's allowed to say that because he was a doctor, he was a surgeon. So I took his word for it, so I never looked back. So, you know, I went into engineering, but okay. Now, I'm going to say something about Sudhir Skalayur. He's a vote of thanks. He's after the questions. He thinks we met about 10 years ago. And I never told him this, but actually we didn't. We met in 1992 when I was 14 years old due to a bizarre incident in which it involved smuggling sandwiches into the school at recess. The canteen was really that bad, and we just went out and, you know, carrying sandwiches in with us to give to everyone in class, and we got caught and were expelled for 2 days. Now, most people, when we were expelled from school, would go to the beach or stay at home or whatever. We decided to take a taxi and to drive 1 hour, which in Cyprus is a very, very long way. Okay, it's as far as you can go. So we took a taxi with parental permission, and we we went all the way to Nicosia to see this guy, Sudhir Skalayur, that I had heard was working on solar energy in a place back then which was ATI, which doesn't exist anymore. He's now in a different institution. And that was the first time I met him. He probably doesn't remember this. Okay? And that got me into solar energy in general. A friend of mine, Monsef Tanfor, convinced me that even though I was a mechanical engineer by training, I should shift into chem-eng. I also heard that the salaries were higher. Jeff Maitland told me about £10,000 a year. Okay, so I came here. And when I came here, Klaus Helgaard, a colleague of ours, professor in the department, one day walked into my office and said, you should look at this hybrid PBT thing. There might be something interesting there for you. He started talking to me about it. I wasn't aware of this technology before. And this was a couple of years after I came to the department. This is about 10 years ago. And that's what started the journey, and that's what got me into. So these are the small little moments, right, in your career that lead you to, well, 10 years of work. I don't know if it was worth it, but here we are. I'm not going to thank individuals because I was too worried I'm going to leave someone behind. So I think you know who you are, everyone. And just a small, I guess, special thank you to the people that flew here from Cyprus. Thank you. You came a long way. I appreciate it. But I want to say 3 courses I learned from my supervisor, and they helped me to get to where I am. Sonondas Mastoragos is in Cambridge. He told me integration is a very forgiving process. He was talking mathematically, all right? But I've used this in my career in many different ways outside of mathematics too. I think it's good advice. The second thing he said is on the balancing, right, between quality and quantity, Omar, you mentioned that before. He said what we want is many excellent papers. So that's clear direction, right, where you want to go to resolve that conundrum, that conflict. And the final thing he says, as a PhD student, I was too much of a perfectionist. I was spending too much time on writing papers. I wanted to get it just perfect before I send it. And he told me, an excellent paper now is better than a perfect paper later. And I keep telling my students the same thing, and I think this got us to where we are. Thank you very much for coming. That's it from me. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Great. I think we're going to do a Q&A, and we're going to alternate between the room and online. And if we're going to do the room first, I think let's just wait until the microphone arrives to whoever wants to ask the question to make sure that the online folks can hear us. And we have a microphone, I think, up there. Don't be shy. Yes, please, if you can.
While we're waiting, Gan, is there any water there, or did I just make that up? Sure.
I saw Gan filling it up earlier.
Is that where this went?
Yes. There it is. Okay. Go ahead, please.
One is doing a PVD, not a PhD. Is that switch on? Right? Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful presentation, Christos. Very interesting. 4 years for a PV panel. The first 4 years are used to produce the same energy that was used to produce the panel itself. So the life cycle analysis here is really very important. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the let's say advantages of doing more with the PV cell than just generating electricity. That's kind of hidden in some of the basic economics. There are two things which are hidden. I didn't really have time to go over them. One is what you're saying. In a life cycle analysis, it's about the total usefulness you can get out of something. If it's just electricity, you're limiting that. So the life cycle benefits of this type of approach would be better. But there's a second benefit which is also hidden, because life cycle also means life. And one of the problems or challenges of any technology is that it lasts a certain amount of years before you have to replace it. Temperature control to something like this can have secondary benefits in terms of, for example, regulating the temperature, keeping it a little bit more steady, not going to very high temperatures during the day when it's hot. So this can mean that your PV panel would basically, or your cells would last a little bit longer. So the life cycle benefits actually can have secondary benefits also from that. So it's a very good point. One last thing to say, just to kind of add to this. We haven't done proper life cycle analysis. It's not an area that I specialize in. I think it's a very difficult area to get in because it depends very, where does things come from, and so there's a big error bars on that, and I'd love to have a look at some of that, but I'm sure that there will be benefits to this. So I'm talking qualitatively, if you like.
I think we can maybe take a question. Is there a question online? Yeah.
Thank you, Chris, for the nice talk. Here's a question for you. It's from Michel Depap. His question is, do you think heat pump integration with PVT could be a next step? Yes or no? If yes, what are the challenges? And if no, why not?
Only yes or no? So we've done investigations of systems. I showed you just 3 examples. I couldn't show everything. But we have done some investigations where a heat pump is connected to things like PVT panels, in the same way that a PV panel can be connected to a heat pump. What you need to think about is that there are costs involved, and there are different regions in the world. If you have a lot of sun, you can get a lot of high temperature heat, okay, potentially without adding the heat pump. You can always get more heat by adding the heat pump, but it's not for free. Right? Typically what happens is in warm regions you can probably get the high temperatures that you want relatively cheaply. When you start going to places where your solar irradiance, so your resource, is a little bit lower, something like a heat pump becomes much more useful because it allows you that temperature bump to get closer to demand by the household. So unfortunately the answer is yes in some cases, no in some other cases. It depends on the cost and it depends on what you're trying to do. Yes, thank you.
the room now. Okay, Ray.
Thanks. I think you mentioned that the sun doesn't always shine, but I wasn't aware that you indicated how you would integrate some kind of storage mechanism to make use of the energy that you waste, or the energy that you need when the sun doesn't shine.
Yeah. So I mean, there are two ways that in the system models that we've looked at, there are two ways to deal with this type of intermittency. The first one is that you use the grid as your store. So you're connected to the grid. You're in an urban area with good grid connection. When you overgenerate electricity, you sell that to the grid. You have a monetary benefit from that. And at night, you can basically import energy from the grid. Okay, so you're basically using the grid as your battery if you want. But we've also done cases where you have batteries. These are small systems. Okay, so typically some lithium-ion solution, right, a few kilowatt hours of storage is enough. Once you start going to much bigger systems, so industrial applications and that type of thing, and I know that your interest is in larger sort of thermomechanical systems, I think that there might be a role for something like that. Okay, but we haven't looked at this combination at much larger scales. Typically, when we say there's on-site storage, we just use conventional batteries. Lithium-ion these days would be the commercially available best option, let's say.
Cool. I think we take another couple of questions. Maybe we go back online. Is there a question online?
Yeah. Here's a question from Annan. The question is, could PVT solution be more cost efficient than solar thermal for industrial applications?
Yeah, it's another one of those questions where there's not a single answer to this. It depends on the industrial plant, it depends on the industrial process. If you have an industrial process that requires only heat, then generation of some energy vector that you don't need is not useful to you. So you're always having to cater to some demand. That's ultimately what you're trying to do. If the demand for something is not there, there's no point generating it. Why? Because it costs you money and resources to do so. Okay? But if you have an industrial process that has both an electrical demand and a thermal demand, then typically PVT would be more cost effective. Typically. I mean, we're generalizing. I don't know the ratio of this and that, but it would be more cost effective than simple solar thermal because electricity is quite valuable. And so you're delivering something of much greater value than just the heat that a solar thermal system would be able to deliver. Yeah. And I say that with pain because I like solar thermal systems.
Great, thank you. Maybe one more from the room here. Okay. Make me walk all the way up there. That's right. Yeah, I think I probably need it. Pass it on, please. Thank you.
Hi, Christos. Really enjoyed the lecture. I was wondering about the use of ITO, particularly because it runs into scarcity issues. Have you had any thoughts about possible replacements, or are there opportunities to be exploited there? I won't ask any thermodynamics questions.
Yeah, it's unfair because it's one of those questions I can't answer, so it should be banned. But anyway, so I'm not a materials expert in terms of selecting materials for these coatings. But I can tell you that there's a lot of work being done on alternatives, and you're right. ITO, there are also issues about cost because these are large surfaces, right? But they're looking at some alternatives. I don't know specifically the names, right? But I know that there are lower cost alternatives. ITO has a better performance though, so there seems to be some kind of cost benefit there in terms of your performance trade-off that you need to figure out. Yeah, it's a whole space. It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know the answer there. I mean, I know that there's work being done there. I couldn't tell you what's best. I guess it depends on the situation and so on. Yeah.
Cool. I think we should probably release our prisoner, but not before the vote of thanks. And so I think I'd like to call on Professor Sotiris Kalogiru to give the vote of thanks, and there he is on our screen.
Stay here.
Yeah, so over to you. We can't hear you.
You can't?
Yeah, I can now. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay. It's great to be able to through the internet. Okay, it is my honor and privilege to deliver this vote of thanks for my colleague, collaborator, friend, Christos Markides. Unfortunately, due to other commitments, I cannot be with you in person, but thankfully, modern technology gives us the tools to do this from a distance. We have watched, and I believe all of you agree with me, a wonderful lecture by Christos, which showcased the extent, magnitude, and importance of his work. Actually, I first met Christos during one of his visits to Cyprus, where, of course, in the pre-COVID era, he used to come every year for solar testing, and the chemistry between the two of us was clear, and we have similar research interests, but also because he's a nice person who is very knowledgeable of his area of work. We both have a strong trust in renewable energy systems, which started at the earliest time when not so much attention was paid to them as we do today. From time to time, perhaps by coincidence, perhaps by fate, we often met at various conferences, and in 2015, Christos invited me to give 2 lectures to Imperial students, one on renewable energy systems and one on how to write a successful research paper. I should mention that 1 year before that, I was chosen to take over as editor-in-chief of the journal Renewable Energy, while a few years earlier, I was appointed deputy editor-in-chief of the journal Energy, both from Elsevier. Soon after that event, and when the opportunity was given, Christos was invited to become editorial board member of Energy, a position he holds until now. And in 2016, he was also appointed subject editor of Renewable Energy, taking over the area of solar thermal technologies. Both positions were well deserved because of his excellent background, the important research he has already performed in relevant areas, and his publication in these and other top quality journals. While he was a subject editor in Renewable Energy, of course, as myself editor-in-chief, we had a very close interaction, both for the journal and in research. And as I used to host a few of his PhD students at my laboratory in Cyprus each summer, mainly for experimental work in Cyprus, taking advantage of the good solar environment that is available here. His excellent work in the journals he was involved with and his growing reputation were recognized by Elsevier, and in 2019, he was offered the position of editor-in-chief of Journal Applied Thermal Engineering, a position he holds until now. This was a very good development for Christos, but unfortunately not a very good one for my journal, as we lost an excellent editor when he had to step down from the subject editor position. However, it was a development I fully supported because such a position in any international journal gives the editor worldwide visibility and reflects well not only on the person holding the position, but also on the institutions he is coming from. Of course, I should mention that beyond these editorial activities, Christos is active in the community by holding leadership positions in numerous committees and boards. At this point, please allow me to, and I would like to say a few words about the form of energy we are trying to harness for the benefit of humanity. As we know, solar energy is an abundant renewable energy source that can help cover a significant part of our needs, of our energy needs, while at the same time promoting sustainability by reducing fossil fuel resource consumption and thus the emissions related to this use. Actually, solar energy is a form of electromagnetic radiation that travels from the only star of our solar system, the Sun, and arrives at the Earth's surface a little more than 8 minutes after leaving the Sun. 2 types of systems can be developed to harness this resource, and these are the solar thermal collectors, which convert the solar radiation into thermal energy, and photovoltaic solar panels, which utilize the solar spectrum to convert sunlight into electricity directly, noiselessly, and without involving any moving parts. Nowadays, PV panels can be found all around us. This technology, however, as Christos mentioned in his presentation, can only convert part of the sun's energy to useful electricity, with the rest lost to the environment. Both Christos and I are pioneer researchers in the field of which focuses on trying to pull down photovoltaic panels in the so-called hybrid PV thermal collectors by extracting the thermal energy and using it for some other useful purpose. This pulling down allows the panels to work at a lower temperature and at a higher efficiency, which also extends their useful life. So it's a win-win situation, I would say. As we have seen, Christos has been working specifically on a new set of design principles for hybrid PV thermal technologies based on spectral splitting, an approach that selectively allows appropriate wavelengths of the sunlight to be used for electricity generation by the PV cells, while the rest of the sunlight is absorbed by the fluid, which is heated and then delivered to homes, industrial processes, or other buildings. At this point, I should mention that Christos has made important contributions and won multiple global awards on his work in this field. However, as you will also know, if you know him well, or look at his track record, he is also a polymath who is active in many other areas from experimental fluid mechanics, thermofluids, and heat and mass transfer, and has an interest in a very wide range of energy technologies as well as in energy systems research. Christos has made contributions in all these fields, and any one of these could have formed the basis of his inaugural lecture. Although personally, I must say, I'm very happy that he has chosen the solar energy for his lecture today. I was glad to hear from Christos that he was promoted to the professor position at Imperial College London, surely one of the most prestigious universities in the UK and in the world, a position that he very well deserves because it is a reflection of the hard work and dedicated work he carried out over the years. Thank you, Christos, for your contributions to renewable energy and beyond. This professorship, I'm very much sure that is very well deserved. Christos, I'm sure your parents, family, and friends are very proud of you. To be successful in our profession, you need to be bright, enthusiastic, passionate, hardworking, and also it is critical to question things and not take them as granted. Christos fully meets this criteria. It was absolutely no surprise to me that he was awarded the chair. Christos, I recognize your leadership in your areas of research, and I'm very happy to be able to congratulate you on this promotion to the professor level. Congratulations, my friend. I'm sure you will excel in this position as well as in the previous one you possessed, and I look forward to our continued interaction and continued success. Thank you very much, and all the best for your life and family and everybody. Thanks a lot.
Which is a great moment to be speechless, because I think that's the end of the proceedings. Professor Kalohiro, thanks very much for the wonderful words, which Christos thoroughly deserves. Thanks, everybody, for joining us both online and in person. This concludes the proceedings for this evening, unless you're joining us afterwards for dinner. But I think...
if they want to see anything, they can come down.
Oh.
If they want to see anything.
Sorry?
If they want to see anything, they can come
Oh yeah, and of course we've got live demos. We've got a few contraptions here which you're welcome to see, and there's probably some water collecting over there, which is all legit. It's all really pretty cool. So please do come down, ask questions. We'd be delighted to show you. there is something in there.
Yes.
There we go. Yeah, proofs in there. Anyway, thanks very much again. Let's join me for one last time to thank Christos for a wonderful inaugural.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. All right, well done.